Hello, everyone. My name is Martin, and I'm the Director of Marketing at Evolvin and your host for this session. Just a few words about how you can join in. Listen on your computer speaker system or dial the conference line by selecting Use Telephone. Have a question? Type it into the question area. Well, I'm happy to have for this series our Bill Grant. As Evolvin's Senior Director of Technical Sales and Services, Bill is committed to help leading organizations put an end to chronic performance and availability problems. Prior to joining Evolvin, Bill led an IBM Rational Technical team in consulting for applying modern software engineering practices and automating IT governance. Hello, Bill. How are you today?
Hi, sorry I was muted, Martin. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay. So, before we begin, let's welcome all our attendees and thank you for joining us. The session should be very exciting. Now, let's quickly go over today's agenda. Bill will introduce you to our blended analytics concept and how we blend actual changes with symptoms of the environment in IT activities. We'll pause to take your questions. Then, in the live demo, Bill will show you key use cases for how our customers use Evolvin for preventing and troubleshooting incidents. And we'll wrap it up with a QA. To remind you, throughout today's session, you can send questions through the GoToWebinar control panel located on the right side of your screen. We'll do the best to address all questions during the presentation and demo or at the end. So let's get started. Bill, I'm going to hand this over to you.
That was great. Thanks, Martin. So first and foremost, I want to give a little quick background on Evolvin the company. Just a big message about here is that we're trusted by a lot of our customers. We have a lot of analyst and industry support. And really what we are striving to do is help customers make better sense of their change data and be more efficient about solving problems and resolving incidents earlier, and honestly trying to be proactive about issues that could be happening so that we can solve those things before they become incidents. So when you take a look at this image, what do you see as different between the two panels, between 1999 and 2015? I'll make it a little bit easy. There's really nothing different. And in terms of solving incidents and being more efficient with incidents, we really haven't changed our process. It's been quite the same. So let's talk a little bit about the current best practice that's been in practice for a long time. What we tend to do is get a lot of the smartest people involved to solve an issue, and that, whether that's a war room or a MIMBridge or whatever you call it, it ends up getting a lot of SMEs involved. They all bring their own data into the room, so there's no shared dashboard that contains all the information that are used to solve issues. And they tend to be very focused on symptoms and not root causes. So symptoms are things like the system seems slow and things like that. These are symptoms of issues, not what actually caused the issue. And a lot of it is manual data crunching, a lot of, oh, it could be this, it could be that, and really nothing that's automated to make a real sense out of the data. And so what the end result of this is that there are way too many service incidents that are happening. When I talk with teams like rapid response teams, what they say is, I just have too many incidents, too many alerts to deal with, and there's just it's constantly in this firefighting mode. The mean time to resolution or troubleshooting time is way too long. So for those most critical issues, it tends to be not just minutes and hours, but oftentimes even talked about in days and hopefully not, but even sometimes weeks of time. And the other part is that there's this all the king's horses type of response, and that is very wasteful, right? If you have some people from the operating system team, the networking team, developers coming in, all of these folks, many of which will be found to not have any insight or responsibility to an issue, this is a very wasteful way to resolve it. And it's also just a very reactive firefighting loop. So in other words, we're not really doing anything to avoid these kinds of issues. And part of that is just the process or the mentality of organizations. People are rewarded for resolving a Sev1 issue that everybody sees. But when you solve something proactively or find something ahead of time, there's really not a mentality that should be appreciated. But quite frankly, that's going to be your most cost-effective way to get out of trouble in the IT world. So what's the first question that people ask when something is wrong? I think probably if you're thinking about this question, you're probably going to come up with the same thing that most of our prospects and customers ask, which is what changed in the environment? What's different about now that was different from, you know, an hour ago, 24 hours ago, 2 days ago, etc. So the key word there is change. Change is at the center of many, many incidents in the IT world. And having a better handle of what's changed is really the key to being successful both proactively and reactively. So let's talk a little bit about Evolvin solution. And when I talk about this, I talk very essentially about this change-centric world here. Over here in the top left. So what Evolvin does is it is collecting detailed change information. And when I say changes, I want to be specific about my definition here. I'm talking about the actual things that change in a system. That could be a configuration parameter. It could be the application itself, whether it's the jar file and we see a checksum was updated, or even the timestamp in some cases. Whether it's an individual parameter like a debug switch on WebSphere. It could be something like a database schema was changed, so tables, indexes, views are changed, and in some cases it may be key configuration data that are changed as well. And of course the other kinds of changes are things like hardware, capacity, things like that are absolutely changes. So when we talk about changes, these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. Now, that information is very critical for understanding the root cause, but there's other information that's absolutely helpful in helping us diagnose an issue. For example, if there are alerts coming from a performance management system or a log system or a networking system, these are all absolutely useful in investigating an active issue, one that either has risen to the level of a problem that needs to be solved or simply an anomaly that we need to look into. So symptoms are definitely useful in resolving issues. Now, the other thing that we can leverage are things like IT context. So if we know that we have approved changes out there and we have a deployment that is kicked off, then what we can do is treat all of these changes together. And if we're looking to do proactive analysis of data, we may decide to acknowledge that expected changes are okay and focus only on the unauthorized or unexpected change. So context can really be helpful for us in a proactive way, in some cases in a reactive way in understanding what changes are occurring, but absolutely, again, helpful in trying to solve these issues. So all of these data sources are useful. Now what Evolvin is doing is taking all of this information, both the change information that we collect directly, as well as events or activities coming from these other products, and applying analytics to them. This is really kind of the intelligence of the blender, right? If you have a smart blender, the smart blender is going to say, hey, I don't want to jam, so how am I going to deal with that situation? That's what Evolvin's doing to these IT problems. So what we have is a knowledge base that understands what changes are more critically impactful, and in what ways could they impact the security of my system, could it impact the performance of my system, etc. And we can also apply risk dimensions to understand, or score changes. And then there's other intelligence we can use, whether the machine learns, hey, I saw this before, so that might be interesting, or we can detect anomalies. I noticed that an update or a patch is typically applied on Friday nights from 7 p.m. to midnight, and suddenly I have a patch applied on a Tuesday. That's quite interesting. So we can apply these anomalies as well to help score our changes. And ultimately what we're looking to get is an understanding of what changed, but not just everything that changed, prioritized what's most interesting that changed, I want to get to the root cause. When I'm in an incident, I need to understand what's causing this. And then ultimately, if I really get good, I can start to predict risks. If I start to see things that I know are going to have an impact on me, I want to be able to address those before they become problems. And ultimately, that should lead to less issues, faster resolution of issues, and more efficient processes. And for our customers, that's absolutely what we're doing. So let's go into a little bit of detail about kind of how we can do this in both a reactive and a proactive way. Here I've got kind of a traditional curve of time and risk as it relates to an incident. So you can see that, for example, we have a change that occurs, and for Evolvin, that means we can detect that change shortly after it occurs, near real time we call it. Then you might have an incident that occurs, and at that point, Evolvin can be correlating and analyzing the risk of the changes that it detected earlier. Now, you may have an alert that goes off, and that again is going to provide some additional context to the product. And ultimately, at that point, you'll be able to fix the problem and resolve it out here. That's a rapid improvement over the traditional situation where you're doing this manually, you're doing what's called root cause analysis, and that time is just going up, and the longer it takes to get to the fix, the more risk there is, and quite frankly, the more dollars that are lost. So this is exactly what we want to get to, is to be able to identify changes. And in two ways I always say this. Number one, if a change occurred, then certainly we want to be considering those changes first. Number two, if we see that there wasn't a change from a configuration perspective, perhaps we move on to the other thing more quickly. So that's what we want to be able to do. Now, to be honest, we don't really want to wait for incidents to happen. So where customers, once they get good at being reactive towards incidents and they understand how to use the product for reacting to incidents, we want to ultimately get to avoiding them in the first place. And how can we do that? Well, if we detect a risk ahead of time, we detect the change and we assess the risk and we do an analysis on that, we can fix it even before an incident occurs. And ultimately, that's where we want to get. Now, certainly we'll never get 100% of those, and that would be pretty unreasonable to think we'll avoid all incidents. But even if we could resolve some of the big ones, particularly ones we know that are going to be impactful, then we're doing pretty good. So that's really where we'd ultimately like to get to. So let's talk about that in context. And this is a screenshot of Evolvin, which I'll be showing you in the demonstration. What you see here is a view of all changes that are occurring in the middle. And up top here is where I have IT context. So IT context are those things that are approved or are done through automation. And these are things that I would want to know are occurring, right? If I see changes below these bars, in some cases I may want to lower their risk because I know that they've been approved. And in other cases I may not, but I certainly want to know that they're occurring and I want to have some context about those changes. So these, again, these things could be the deployment automation. It could be a service desk. So when we talk about changes, sometimes Evolvin's changes are confused with change requests. We're not a change request management system. That would be your service desk. These are actual changes, individual files or individual parameters within files or results of commands, etc. So the context allows us to see this relationship between here's what I said I was going to do, or here's what I did if we're talking about a deployment automation, and then here's what I actually see changed, not just considering what the deployment automation or the service ticket says, but what actually changed. And then other contexts that certainly is useful to Evolvin are CMDBs. So if you're using a CMDB that tells you what applications you have and what hosts or devices are part of that and what the topology looks like, that is a great input for something like Evolvin. Now, the other part of this is understanding symptoms. And as we said, if you have something like an APM tool that says, hey, there's a health rule violation here. I noticed that the CPU jumped up significantly. Or I noticed that this synthetic transaction is a lot slower than it usually is. Those are absolutely useful as events. So you can see down here some examples for performance management tools or log analysis tools or networking tools. These are all providing events that could be used to address or investigate what changes may have been causing that particular event. And then, as I said, in the middle here, these reds, yellows, and green bars are changes. These are the true root causes, and these are the things that are collected by Evolvin. Now, when we talk about all these other feeds, the first natural question is, well, where are these coming from? Who are you integrated to, and that kind of thing. And this is just a sampling of integrations. In fact, this is a relatively new feature for Evolvin, and we've added all of these integrations into the product, and we're just adding more by demand. The integration itself is relatively simple with a very basic API that reports the events, so it's very easy for us to add additional ones into the system. And then where the smarts comes in is what do we do with that information. But that's the part that's right in the product, and once we get the events into the system, the Evolvin product does all the work. So just to give a couple of examples of some of these, we support things like AppDynamics or Dynatrace for APM. We support things like Splunk or Sumo Logic or Elastic on the log analysis side. On the service desk, we have an integration with ServiceNow, and in fact even have UI support for ServiceNow, so you can even see Evolvin changes within ServiceNow screens. And then around deployment tools, a number of tools like Puppet or CF Engine or CA-Nolio, and on the CMDB side, things like Microsoft SCCM, Microsoft SCOM, etc. I think SCOM is actually covered more on the symptom side. So lots of integrations to lots of different tools. Now, one more thing I want to comment about what Evolvin is doing with this information, and this will be tough to get in a few-minute demo, but really there's a lot of intelligence in what's presented. Ultimately, to the user, this all comes out as red, yellows, and greens. So the product tries to figure out what it is to show you, but what it's actually doing behind the scenes is quite intelligent. It looks to reduce noise, it looks to normalize information across different systems, and it utilizes a very rich analytics engine to score changes. That is so important. So I'll give an example. If a change is inconsistent with other systems and is not compliant with a policy and happens in production and happens at a time that's very different from other changes and is independent or unique, like one change to the operating system next to 500 changes to an application, that is a very interesting change to Evolvin and a very interesting change to a customer. And the flip side is if I flipped all of those around, all of those changes would score lower. So essentially you can think of the algorithm as taking these different dimensions, which a user can control, and determining based on that how interesting is the change. So what you're looking at on my screen right here is a view of what I just showed, essentially the changes to the system associated with context. In this particular example, I have a deployment from, let's say, CA-Nolio, and I have symptoms coming from APM tools or Splunk, etc. Now, I also have all of my changes that are scoring. So let's say I'm in an incident investigation and I need to understand what changes may be related to a particular event. I select the event, and what Evolvin will do is highlight all of the changes that are relevant. Now, there's a couple important pieces to this. Number one, certainly it will look at time. So if it's closer to the event, that will certainly be more interesting than things that are further back. But it also needs to understand the context. Is it to that particular system where the event came from, or even a related system? Then I'm still going to get that showing up, right? Because even if a transaction failed on one system, that still could be due to another system that has an impact. So all of those things are going to be taken into consideration. And now the 188 changes that I had in scope are now filtered down to about 3 changes that could be relevant. They happen to be scoring high, and they happen to be to 2 different components. I can see that, for example, 2 of these changes that were found are to services on the operating system side. I have a couple services that were changed from disabled to auto. Absolutely could have an impact on the system. And the other one that I've got here is actually to a database system. A particular database view had a column that was added into the system, and again, that absolutely can have an impact on the system. So here's a great way, in a very quick amount of time, all I had to do is bring the view up and see what changes were relevant to a particular data source. I can get a quick understanding of that. So that's the incident investigation flow. Now, really where Evolvin will shine, even more so than investigating, or at least this is where you want to catch the issues, is proactively. And so if I switch over to my risk analysis, you can see here that I have all those dimensions that I talked about. I talked about things like if it's a production system or a pre-prod system, if it's in our knowledge bases important versus not important. I didn't mention frequency, but it could be that if the change happens all the time, it's less interesting than if it happens only once in a while. So one of the ones that I'm going to introduce now for my proactive analysis is this authorization status. I'm going to bump up the priority of that particular parameter. And as I did that, if you notice on the right side, my risk profile or my calculation of score changed very quickly. And what you'll notice first and foremost is that items underneath this particular approved change are now trending green. Now I say they're trending green because they don't absolutely just go green. I certainly could filter them out, but because I have different analytics being applied, it actually is saying that, hey, even within these changes, there are some things that are quite critical on a number of other scales, so you probably want to look at them. Now what I'm going to do is something even better than that. I'm going to actually go here and I'm going to only narrow down or look at the highest risk items. So if I'm in a proactive mode, maybe I don't have time to look at all 188 changes, and to be honest, 188 changes is manageable, but let's say I really just want to look at the most critical ones that are relevant. I do that and I'm now down to the 14 changes that are scoring the highest. And in my risk score analysis, they're all scoring very high. And I have different breakdowns over here that I can address any particular area. For example, if I was curious about things to services, I can select that and I can just start with any items that are related to services. Or I could break down and just look at things that are related to path name and things like that. So I can narrow it down that way. The other thing I can do is simply look at this list in the risk scored way. So if I go all the way down to the bottom, this is showing me each and every change that was found, and they are ranked by score. So you'll see that the top of the list here are still the ones that I saw in my incident investigation mode. So I certainly will have those things, if they're interesting changes, will still rank highly, and hopefully I can address those proactively. They were unauthorized, they're the critical items that I have, so those are certainly things that I would want to be sensitive to. But even beyond that, there may be other items that are still interesting to look at. Here I've got a number of changes that actually were marked suspicious by somebody on the team. So these are things that probably I should want to be aware of. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom here, I've got several changes that were authorized, so theoretically they should be okay, but I can also see that they were updates to security. And I'm very sensitive to security in this particular analysis. I've said that anything that's security related should score very high. And so even though they were authorized, that might have taken the score down a little bit, but they still rise into the level of interesting things that I should look at. And that's really where the power of analytics comes in, this ability to score things and to let you address the most critical changes. Let the solution do the work for you, but give you a good insight into what's going on in the environment. Okay. And there are a number of other ways that that Evolvin can be used. I just touched on a few of them in today's session, but I'll show you a few different use cases. We talked about accelerating troubleshooting, making that much quicker to analyze and know what changed and relate them to symptoms in IT context. We talked about preventing incidents, trying to look at the highest risk changes early and understanding anomalies. We didn't talk about consistency, but the other way that we can help in incident prevention is actually looking at incidents. So what we can do, we can actually look at consistency. So for example, we could be comparing between environments or against a golden baseline, or we can define policies that say certain things are very important to me. So I want to know if those things are ever changed. That absolutely is valuable, and you can use that to prevent incidents as well. In fact, I'll show a quick demo of that before we go to the Q&A, or as we're queuing up questions. I'll show that because we're We've got a few minutes left now. The last two use cases I want to mention are around DevOps analytics and automated audit. These are other places that Evolvement can be used to ensure that the infrastructure is ready. You can, for example, make sure that your pre-prod environment is at the same level as your production environment and vice versa. We have customers that are maintaining multiple environments in pre-production and production and disaster recovery, and it's a challenge to keep all of these in sync. So being able to apply analytics and compare these, but apply analytics is very critical to them. And we can also help with audit. A lot of people or customers are dealing with auditors that are asking, how can you prove that nothing changed, or how are you notified if an unauthorized change is occurring? Well, this answers those questions for audit. And perhaps Evolvent, as a company, didn't start with the audit use case in mind, but we find that with so many customers, they just simply say, yes, I want to use it for investigation, I want to use it for this, but it looks like I can get my audit requirement fulfilled as well. And so we've been helping a number of customers get through audits and really be able to prove that nothing changed. It's such an important question in these days. So just as a quick summary, and we'll get to questions, the big difference here, cross-silo data, really looking at all of this data, change data, but also other data sources. We really believe it's change-centric. That's really the root cause, and unless you're looking at change, it's really impossible to know exactly what has caused this new scenario, this new issue. It's really all about analytics. Quite frankly, if we presented just changes as, here's 1,000 changes that occurred, go and figure out if any of these are problematic, nobody would look at that data. And so really it's the analytics that are critical for this. And then finally, results in minutes. So changes can be concluded or analyzed in just a few minutes, and even you saw the scoring occurring as I was making changes to my analysis profile. So really that's the key, is getting these answers very quickly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Martin for any questions, and I'm just going to show briefly, while we're queuing up any questions, that last scenario that we mentioned around looking at policy and understanding how I'm doing against baselines.
Okay, thanks.
Martin, are there any questions?
Yep. Yeah, we got a question about the blended data feeds. Do we need all the blended data feeds integrated already in order to get answers out of Evolvent?
It's a good question. So no, absolutely not. You can start with no data feeds and just simply look at change. And to be honest, we've been in business for 6 years now, and we didn't have the feeds until this year. So there's plenty of value in just getting change information. But obviously, if you have any of these feeds, it will enhance the solution. You'll have more context to change information, and so it's certainly valuable. So, but no way is it required to start.
Okay, we're taking more questions. Bill, why don't you go ahead with this demo?
Okay, I'm going to show it really quickly, and I just wanted to make sure that folks saw it. What I have is a view on policy, and so what I can do with policy is it allows me to very easily see how I'm doing against a particular predefined policy. I'm going to show an example of one. Here I've got a policy that is saying that I want to make sure that my VMware tools level is always equal to a particular version. And so I can run that against either my whole entire environment, or I can run it against a particular application, and that is constantly running and evaluating. And if I get successes, then I'll see those successes here in green. And if I have failures for a particular version that's failed, here's one, for example, where the version number is set at a different version. It's set at 28964 instead of 29005. Then I could be notified about something like that. This can be very helpful if you have issues where your database connection string was changed, or a debug switch should always be off in production, or certain version levels are required. Policy can help with that. And just kind of in the same vein, we can also do comparisons across multiple systems. So here you've got a comparison across 5 servers. I see differences over time, and I can, again, very much the same way we looked at different changes before, we can score them, we can analyze them, and here even you can see that we get a nice visual about which system is the anomaly. This is the number 2 system, and we can do that. We can see that that version is unique across all the other systems. I'll leave this visual up while we're taking other questions, but I just wanted to make sure that folks also saw that we can look at changes. We can also look at consistency of environments as well. Very valuable in making sure that your environment is very resilient.
Okay, thanks, Bill. All right, we don't have any more questions coming in on the stream today, so I want to thank you very much for the presentation you gave. This was very interesting, and I want to let you know that feel free to drop Bill a line. You can send him your questions or feedback, or you can contact us and set up to schedule a one-on-one, and Bill will go through a more detailed example of the product. So on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks very much, and thanks everyone for joining, and thank you, Martin, for moderating.
Sure thing. Take care.